Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to the Silmarillion Film Project. This is session number 26 of Season 6, and tonight we descend into hell, so that ought to be a good time for everybody, I think. It is time to do episode 10, which is, of course, will begin with Baron and Luthien approaching Angband, all the way down to the descent to Angband, the theft of the Silmaril, the dismemberment of Baron, and then escape by Eagle. That is the scope of our episode, episode 10 that we'll be discussing during our episode here tonight. We have a wonderful script that was written for this. I was telling Nick before the show, Marie, that I was particularly impressed at the prose quality of the stage directions, which was really unusually high in this episode. I'm like, who wrote this? Like, why, this is different. Anyway, it was fun. It was fun. It was clearly a lot of visual imagination being invested in, like, the way the scene was being described and unfolded there. It was pretty cool. I'm joined by Nick and Marie. See, I'm not good at this intro thing. I don't normally do it. Nick and Marie, our head writers, are with me as usual. Dave couldn't make it, which is why I'm fumbling my way through the introduction. Before we get going, just a few announcements. We've got some moot updates here this week. So our next moot coming up is Tex Moot on April 15th. On tax day, so it's tax moot officially. And we do actually, it's official now. We officially did have somebody who submitted a proposal to give a talk on Aragorn's tax policy in celebration of tax day. So that's happening. I'm very excited about that. Actually, the theme is language. We're going to be doing all kinds of fun linguistic stuff. Marie, Chad, and Matt Cannon are going to do a Tengwar lesson that day, and of course, both
very good
frequent attendees at Tex Moots. We're going to be doing a Tengwar lesson. We're going to be doing some conlang stuff. It's going to be really, really neat. Lots of fascinating language stuff going on at Tex Moot on the 15th. So that's down in San Antonio on April 15th. May 20th, we'll be in Toronto for our first ever Canadian moot, our first Maple Moot in Toronto on May 20th. And then another first up to the Pacific Northwest, at last to Portland, Oregon on September 23rd, the day after Bilbo and Frodo's birthday, for Cascade Moot. Then back to Iowa, one of our old-time favorite spots, Middle Moot, on October 14th, and then back here to Derry, New Hampshire on October 23rd. We're going to be back at Studio Lab in Derry for New England Moot again this year. So that is, and then of course Myth Moot is coming up in June, last weekend of June 22nd to 25th, back in Leesburg, Virginia at the National Conference Center. Good to be back at our traditional venue this year. And tomorrow, the 31st of March, is the end both of early bird registration and of our call for proposals for Myth Moot. So definitely want to encourage people to jump on both of those things. And of course, Film News, casting nominations are open. We're getting ready to talk about casting for season 6. So do go to the message boards to nominate your choices for season 6 roles. So we're not voting on the final casting yet, but we're still taking casting nominations. So if there are people, so you can nominate your favorite voice of Huon. You can, there are several others. As we were talking about in the casting episode, there's sort of fewer premium roles available in this season than has been the case in a little while, but there are still some pretty good ones. So, yeah.
The nominations are off to a good start. We've had about 20 nominees put forward so far.
19 for Huon, or
no, the most is actually for Gorgle the Butcher. Strangely
Gorgle
enough.
the Butcher. Okay, yeah.
We're good on nominees for him, but we only have 2 so far for Baron. So if anyone had someone in mind for Baron and they hadn't quite tossed a name in the ring yet, it would be great to go ahead and do that.
Clearly the highest profile of our nominations. I think people often
But there are
feel
several voices of Huan in there as well.
there's
So
that's good.
yeah,
That's good.
but there's
I'm
room for
glad.
more. So
Yep.
we accept
I may
additional
or may
nominees.
not be in the midst of preparing to drop a nomination into the Huan category, actually.
Right, for voice
Very
of
good.
Huan. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
A familiar
very good.
voice, in fact, but a surprise one for now.
Right. But anyway, okay, so that's so make sure to put in your casting nominations, and then we will move on to, because then of course we'll open voting to vote for the final ones, and then we'll go through the votes and veto people. So that'll be good. We don't veto that many people, but occasionally we'll veto somebody. Anyway. Okay, so let's get back to the episode. The Karen Fonstad map. Okay, here we go. One of the things that I've always found peculiar about this map is that Thangarodrim, is so huge. It's like, was each mountain actually 100 miles across?
Yeah.
I mean, it's, on the one hand, it's very evocative. How, it just kind of is sort of sitting there like this, malevolent, ant's nest or hornet's nest, in the middle of the continent there. But it does always raise questions of scale when I look at it.
It would make Angalicon the Black moon size,
Yeah,
not a big moon, but
right. Yeah, he would have to be about the size of the Death Star in order to crush one of those. But whoa, hang on, accidentally hitting the wrong thing. Okay, all right. So yes, we are heading up towards Angband there. All right, so descent. We are descending into hell. We've got two plots that we're going back and forth among. I say among because there's two, but there's really kind of more than two. In fact, it was one of the things that I was sort of curious about, but I needed a little help on. In fact, because the scenes are not numbered sequentially, and I was getting confused. I was wondering, because it was we had 8 and then 7C and stuff, and I wasn't quite following what was supposed to be going on there. So I have questions. But anyway, the stuff with the enslaved elves. So can I just say first, gorgeous, brilliant. We haven't seen Darial in 2 years? It's been a long time since we've seen Darial. It was last season. Was it last season? Was last season the Darial season? The captive season? Yeah.
Darial has appeared in the past 2 seasons. She was made a captive back in season 4, and then in season 5, she's present when Rogren and company
when Rogren
escape.
escapes. Yeah, right. Okay, that's right. But it was season 4 was the primary Darial Ethelos thing. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, this was one of those things that reading the script, I was like, that makes so much sense. I would not have thought of it. I was not thinking about our captive elves in Angband that we've already met, and of course the introduction of the new one, Gulin, whom we need to remember is there, and maybe get, if not attached to, at least familiar with, so that when he gets publicly dismembered, we'll care about that. Because, of course, in the Silmarillion, we don't meet him until he gets publicly dismembered. So this is, again, one of the fun elements, right, of being able to do this, is that we can give a little bit more backstory. Anyway, point is, brilliant idea to include that. And one of the effects of it was, to me, the most striking thing about this episode was, within the frame of our storytelling here, what felt like almost extreme dilation of the part of the story that Tolkien treats most briefly. In fact, skips over entirely, right? They meet Karkaroth at the front gate. They enter Angband. And pretty soon they arrive down where Morgoth is, right? I mean, the whole descent, he says almost nothing about their descent through Angband. And we spend actually more than 60% of the script on the descent, basically. I mean, or at least we're more than 60% of the way through the script before they get to the throne room, substantially, maybe like 70%. So the build up and the, and I kind of like that proportion, by the way. I mean, it seemed to fit the sort of like, slow, stealthy descent followed by frantic retreat at the end. And so that everything, not only with Baron and Luthien, not only in the A plot, but in the B plot as well, was like happening much more quickly, right? Things were coming to a head much more swiftly, on the latter part than on the first part. Seemed to really fit that. Anyway, so I thought that was really interesting. I mean, seeing the descent of Baron and Luthien through the lens of this reminder of the elves in Angband, I thought was really a really cool idea. So, do you guys want to talk about? Are there things you guys would want to talk about, about that generally, before we move to some of the specific choices in working out that plot, or so you want to speak a little more broadly about kind of what you guys were thinking or hoping to achieve with that, or?
Well, the first thing I should say is that the script writer in this case is Katrin, who I don't think we have publicly named on the podcast yet.
Yes, this is Katrin.
Step one. And unfortunately...
Katrin has been one of our artists. No, she was on to talk about art last season, wasn't she?
Correct.
Yeah,
but unfortunately, she was not available for this session. Yeah. It's not exactly at a friendly time for Europeans.
It's a little hard at +6.
And so it didn't work with her schedule. So unfortunately, she can't be here. But hopefully she says that she hopes that her work speaks for itself.
She had other engagements at 4 a.m. Yeah.
Mostly sleeping, yes, but...
Exactly, right. Yeah, that's perfectly respectable engagement to have at 4 a.m. Yeah, okay. No, I agree. Yeah, and really, I Katrin, great work. I thought this was really fun. This was a really, really cool script. I really enjoyed this. As I said, like... the stage directions were just delicious. Like I was just kind of like reveling in the. I mean, I have to admit, sometimes I kind of skim the stage directions a bit. I'm like I'm following the dialogue, and I glance at them to make sure I know what's happening, right? But I'm going through and I'm following the action and the character and the development and everything that's going on. But like this time, I was like, "Oh no, man! Like I am so here for this." Like I was riveted by the stage directions. Yeah,
that must make the reading of my episodes quite fast, because my dialogue tends to be quite terse.
Yes. Well, it varies. I mean, obviously, sometimes I have to read the stage directions a little bit more carefully, but yeah, no, it was. I was engrossed by Katrin's stage directions. I thought that was a lot of fun. Anyway, as I say, really, really well written episode, and definitely encourage people to follow the breadcrumbs there and read it for themselves. It is posted there on our forums.
Indeed.
Yeah.
I would, in fact, like to talk about the kind of general shift of focus that we've created here, because essentially what would have happened had we not done so is we would have had to somehow fill a half an hour, 40 minutes of TV with the throne room scene, which
right,
like could have been a thing that we could have done.
It could have been, right.
And there were interesting.
By the time Luthien started her third set, it would have really
right. You would have had to have some kind of like kind of trippy dream within a dream within a dream kind of thing going on to kind of ameliorate the.
And this
Mark
is one of the
monologue a lot more than he does that kind of thing.
Right. I mean, so like fascinating little adaptation moment, right? This moment in the Silmarillion, this is such a huge moment, right? I mean, the face to face with Morgoth, not only confronting him face to face and his identification of her and stripping her of her disguise and her defiance of him, and then her Luthien successfully casting Morgoth into sleep. Like, it's a huge moment. This is an enormous epic moment, and so it's one of those things which, when we were talking about the plot outline, it was like a no-brainer. It was like, well, obviously we're going to need a whole episode to do the descent into Angband. But actually, you're right, it's one of those things that when you actually look at it, when you actually think about depicting it, it's quick. There's not much that happens. There are very few kinds of events. It was the episode felt, for that reason, it felt luxurious. Like the amount of time that we were able to, even time like that really beautiful moment when Luthien herself was feeling overwhelmed by the suffering of the elves, right? And like that we get to pause on the way down to the throne room for like Baron and Luthien to have a moment, right? Was I mean, it felt like a luxury, I think of how many times we have been pushed to like squeeze everything in to these episodes, and I was at the time, it's not that I was questioning it. It's not that I was saying, gosh, do we really need this? But I was like, man, are we going to pay for this? Like, this feels self-indulgent, to pause for moments like this in the minute. But there was time. I mean, I didn't think that we were losing much. So no, it was interesting how brief the actual events were and how much more time we had when trying to do something like an hour of production out of this.
Yeah, and that comes as a benefit of the bottle episode idea. Like, by restricting ourselves to only the happenings in Angband, it gave us a lot of time to really kind of dive into, because we created plot lines there in Angband, right?
Yes.
But rather than just follow Varen and Luthien down the, because that would have just been kind of a tour, right?
Yeah.
Of Angband. There's no tension there other than the fact that it's scary and bad.
Yeah.
Right. We did discuss a lot about how to balance concepts of horror with concepts of despair. Like, what level were we depicting? Where did we want things to be gory and in your face and terrible, or did we want to somehow find a way to convey, abandon hope, all you who enter here kind of scenario? Right. And they're different things, and we were hoping that by taking a moment to spend time with characters, we would get a little bit more than just, wow, this is gory and scary looking.
Nobody would let me do like bloody mycelium, which would have been just fantastic, I think. Like, but nobody wanted me to do anything like that.
Sorry, that was just an awesome sentence if taken independently. Yep.
Matthias would know what I was talking about. He knows.
I'm sure he would.
Evan said that he really enjoyed how the prisoner plot line plays to the release from bondage theme without like smacking you in the face.
Absolutely.
With it,
that was one of my first reactions. I mean, when I realized that we were there with Darial at the beginning, I was like, oh yeah, that's perfect. That's perfect. Especially since, and I thought it was especially interesting as I had a shrewd suspicion that we were not, in fact, going to set all the prisoners free in this episode. Which, I mean, there would be maybe a certain expectation of that, since we've been doing a whole bunch of liberations as we go through, and so there might be a kind of expectation that once again, yet another, jailbreak number 5 or whatever it is in this season, right, would be happening here. And it doesn't happen. In fact, it's almost the opposite, right? It's almost the reverse, where the prisoners, instead of Baron Luthien setting free the prisoners allow Baron Luthien to escape, right? And so it was not only a fascinating integration of the release from bondage thing, but I thought a really, really, a really, not quite a reversal, but a really interesting contemplation of it, which is especially important given that we're now building up towards the great escape with the Mandos stuff later on.
Right. The challenges of depicting Angband in this episode are just step one of the challenges of depicting Mandos. And obviously Tolkien doesn't spend a lot of time in either Angband or Mandos in his stories to leave it somewhat mysterious, like deliberately so. Yes. And we've spent at least some time in Angband before now, so it wasn't all from scratch or anything. We've seen the villain plot lines, we've seen our prisoner plot lines. We've not spent time in Mandos, so that's
exactly. No, we've in a sense kind of glimpsed it from afar now in episode 1, right? In the at least with sort of
and
seeing
there's
the landscape there.
Right, and we've seen Morgoth in chains in Angband, and we've in Mandos, and we've seen Feanor's mother Muriel there. Yeah. Again, as a glimpse, but we have not spent time there.
Right, exactly. Anyway, like I said, Gulin certainly was like, I was assuming we weren't escaping. I knew one elf who is certainly not going to be escaping in this episode.
Right. You had pegged Darial as the elf who would never escape Angband when we introduced her storyline originally. And I know that at the time I had been thinking, okay, so she'll just be a prisoner for the entire duration of the First Age. She may or may not survive the destruction of Angband at the end. But I was definitely not anticipating ending her story in season 6 until we got here. Then it's like, oh yeah, okay, that works.
I liked it. I mean, first of all, poor Darial, but no, if we do this carefully, and Evan, I hear your point in the comments there that the prisoners sacrifice themselves and Baron and Luthien don't lose a lick of sleep over it, wedding time. I hear that. But actually, I think that I don't know how much active reflection on the sacrifice of the prisoners there's going to be. But the question of all the way along, freedom and imprisonment, right, has always had this third term looming in the middle, which is death, right? We've definitely seen that with Finrod, right? It's brought in very prominently with Finrod's choice of death, right? Finrod does not escape, but nor is he, kept helpless in prison. He chooses a third option, which leads to his death. So what does that mean? What does that suggest? What does that show? And I thought Darial's ending was like a kind of happy ending. Like it was, I was satisfied by Darial's end. And I think it's important, not only for us, but perhaps even, we don't want to belabor it and stuff, but perhaps even for Baron and Luthien to be asking the question about, is to what extent is survival an essential element of escape? Basically, are those two things the same thing? How is death related to, like, in the whole imprisonment, in, like, if you've got enslavement on the one hand and freedom on the other hand, where exactly does death fall in? How is death related to that? Is a question. I mean, it is going to become the central question with Baron and Luthien by the end. So it's very right to bring that up, and again, even possibly for them to be thinking about it, in the next in episode 11 or something.
Yeah, I mean, in episode 11, obviously they're going to have to deal with the aftermath of Baron losing a hand.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that is a rather permanent situation. He's
Yep.
not growing it back.
Yep.
And so this has some also permanent consequences. And I think that the question of what does Estelle look like in the context of a place like Angband or a place like
Yes.
Mandos,
Yes.
like you have to really look hard to find it.
Mm-hmm.
So Darial's been looking.
Yes.
She's been trying to keep going for something. She's at the point of thinking, well, I guess I'll know it when I see it, but
Yeah.
what if there's nothing that's ever going to happen that's going to make any of this worth it?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
she's struggling to keep going, but also struggling to find any reason or hope in her situation, or any way forward that would be on her own terms.
Right. No, absolutely. I have questions about the prisoners' storylines. Like I want to, like, note at the beginning that a lot of my questions are related to the fact that there's, like, really complicated and, like, deep and abstract things that are being raised here, and really difficult things, and it's not easy to do. So I have some, like, questions and in places some confusions, but I just want to make sure from the very start that, like, I really love the I love the idea. I love a lot of the execution. I think it's just, I mean, in some ways it felt to me, I don't know what it actually is in, like, word count or whatever, but I actually felt that the B plot took more time. I felt like I was spending more time with the prisoners. They seemed almost the point of view characters of this episode. I don't know if that was just an illusion on my part because I wasn't expecting it. It was so much more than I was expecting, but it seemed almost as if they were the primary viewpoint in this episode.
One of the reasons that it might feel that way is the fact that most of Baron and Luthien scenes are spent kind of like observing what's happening versus the scenes where with the prisoners they're doing things and saying things, and there's a philosophical debate that's taking place there. So as far as on paper, I would say it definitely would feel that way.
And
I don't necessarily I don't necessarily know that it would have felt that way on screen, but on paper it sure did.
Yeah, and without a third plot to be cutting away to, and with the two plots overlapping a lot, the blending it together to figure out which one's the A plot and which one's the B plot, it's meant to get lost in the shuffle. By the time you get to Act 3, it's like, what is even happening? What scene are we in? I don't know. We're going back and forth.
Well, was certainly that effect succeeded. I did not know what scene I was in, so yeah, that was good.
Sorry for the confusion, but
hey, it's fine.
The goal was to interweave everything at that point.
Yeah. No, my only confusion about the numbering, because normally I don't even pay real close attention to the numbering, but when I just at one point I happened to notice that I was going backwards in numbering, and so I was like, does this mean that this is not actually the order in which they're going to be presented in, or
no? What it meant was that I forget if it was 7 or 8, but one of them is the prisoner storyline and one of them is the Baron and Luthien storyline. So all and the 8A, 8B, and 8C are Baron and Luthien, say, and 7A, 7B, and 7C are the prisoners. So the order they were on the page is the order they go in, but it was just showing where to intercut them. And I presumed that Katrin was playing with where to cut them and preserved the numbering for
Right.
her own sake.
Yeah, I was assuming that like the sequence of the document was the sequence
Yes.
the scenes would go in, but
Yes, correct.
yeah. But anyway, I wasn't 100% sure. Okay, let us. I want to talk about the B plot first. Let's talk about the captives first, and then we'll come back to Baron and Leithian.
That's fair.
Okay, so we start off with the new prisoners and the old prisoners, right? So Gulin is captured, and his folks are captured in the at the Fens of Serech, right? And that was in the Dagor Bragalux. Actually, I was having chronology questions too at various points.
It's been about 6-7 years since the battle.
Right. So are they just... Because, I mean, that would have been before Fingolfin's death that Gulin would have been taken, right? So, anyway, this is what I was a little confused by. So is he just... So he's new to this particular neighborhood? Where's Gulin been?
Right. So you can't just take your captive soldiers and throw them in the mine and be like, okay, go to work now, because
Right.
they're not gonna.
Right.
So there has to be a transition from captive to broken down prisoner to
Okay.
now
So they go
you're
to,
a
like,
worker.
prisoner boot camp first to get broken before they get thrown into the
Right.
mines.
So they have passed through whatever Angband was doing to them for the last 7 years, and now they're being put on a work detail, but it's for the first time, and so they're a little resistant to the idea of just going along with it.
Okay.
So that's
And
why it seems new, because this aspect of their imprisonment is what's new.
Right. So it's like the it's like when Nigel gets to go forth into gentle treatment, except the opposite. Right.
Yes.
Gotcha. Okay. I'm tracking. And this also explains why, although he's been in Angband for years, Gulin had no idea about the death of Fingolfin, because he was like in solitary torture confinement at that point.
Right.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, that was just to demonstrate the delay in news and that these people are cut off from the outside world.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So that was one little confusion, because I was when Gulin gets thrown in and treated as a newbie. At first, I was like, "Is this a flashback? Are we like?" I didn't know if we were doing a chronological shift. So, and I don't know. I'm not sure to what extent that would create confusion, like in an actual production. Because especially since they would have been taken a long time ago in screen terms, right? I mean,
Right.
like
It was the end
we
of
met
last season.
Gulin, right? We met him, right? Didn't we meet him? We got introduced to him before he was taken. So we will have seen him captured back latter half of season 5.
The
wasn't
last
it?
2 episodes of season 5 were the
Yeah.
Dagor Bragalach, and the
Right.
capture at the Fens of Serech should have been in episode 13, if I'm recalling correctly.
Right. So we saw him captured, almost a whole season ago now. And what happens at the end of that episode, the death of Fingolfin, Gulin is unaware of, right? Like it. Anyway, so yes, it felt like a flashback. And I thought that we might be doing that we might be kind of moving towards like, meanwhile, in the prisons, because it'd been a while, right? I mean, with the last time we saw Darial and the other prisoners was back when Rogren escaped, which was earlier than that in season 5. So, anyway, yeah. So that I don't know how big of a deal this is, but
perhaps some kind of exposition to clarify a little bit might alleviate the confusion.
Yeah, if it's just, if there's some kind of language. I also think that I was thinking about this today. There is an attempt made to separate the prisoners by having the newer prisoners still have food from their supplies, which in retrospect seems unlikely, even if they were fresh out of being captured. Like, there's no way that they still have that stuff on them. But certainly after their time in the re-education pits,
Right.
right?
It's meant to be Lembas, and so
Yeah.
crumbs of Lembas left.
Yeah, I don't. Still.
I realize it's
That was
attempts are
another
being
thing
made to
that did-
differentiate.
Yeah. It was another thing that made their captivity seem very recent.
Mm.
Yeah. So yeah. Yeah, so yeah, that might be, but thinking about the food thing, I can understand the impulse to differentiate them, not only just to sort of show that they're different, but the way that the food discussion was focused was it was a way of making kind of visible the idea that Darial and the others were like totally bought into the Angband system, right? And whereas Gulin and the others were not only like keeping up their spirits in a different sense, which would be tied to the like limbus crumbs, basically, but also like it was a form of resistance, right? Like we have not yet stooped to this, and even and I kind of liked the concept of the food thing because it was about, for Darial, it was about survival, right? Like you don't know what you need to survive, and like they need food to survive. So anyway, I did feel I saw the logistical problems with it, but I did feel that the concept of you are just like subsisting on Angband food, and we have not yet sunk to that level, was a nice, like, visceral, so to speak, and visual way of kind of demonstrating that gap between them. I don't think it'll work, but I like the concept there.
Right. It works fine when Mary refuses to touch meat thrown to him by an orc, right? Because
yes,
it's a very short amount of time there. He's not desperate for food.
right.
It's harder to pull off if you've been captive for 7 years. Yeah.
Right. Do we want to... Tolkien seems to suggest that Calaquendi can go without food for really quite some time. Like Maedhros, possibly for years. So, are we interested in going there at all?
There's really no way in which Maedhros' captivity matches a living thing's need for sustenance on any level. Right. So either Morgoth kept him alive or elves are magic. Like,
right.
There's not really an in-between of, well, you can last for a year without food if you're a Calaquendi or something like that, because he was up there for more than a year.
Yeah.
So, but he does obviously use it in several points with, what is it? Tuor and Varanwe of Tuor's like, well, you might not be close to death, but I am. Kind of a comment. You might not need food.
Showing a differential between like the Noldor and humans is sort of easier to do in that regard.
Yeah, but so if you want to say that they've been on a hunger fast for like 7 years, that would be a pretty extreme way of saying we're not buying into this.
Yeah. It'd be hard.
Yeah.
It'd be hard. I mean, it would be... it seems to me it would be very difficult to do that without straining the secondary belief of the audience. Even people who know, like, the whole Silmarillion tradition, would be like, well, of course, there are those passages that do suggest that they can go for years without food, and yet there's a difference between Tolkien saying that in one sentence and actually seeing it on screen and be like, well, 6.5 years without food and I still feel fine. Like that's kind of hard, you know? So yes, I don't think that's necessarily a great solution. Yeah.
There could be certain things that they accept from the food and Angband and certain things that they don't. And so what Darial's crew is surviving on is they're eating everything that they're given. And maybe Gulin's group is a lot pickier and is like picking out certain things that they find mildly palatable and are discarding the rest. Yeah, you could do something like that where they're still being very snobby about the I'm too good to eat this and look at you stooping to that level. Like you could still maintain that differential and keep the bit with the mushrooms of like, well, if you add mushrooms to it, it's fine.
Yeah.
That's like the poor little Cinda elf. Like I'm trapped in Angband, but here I found mushrooms.
Yeah, which, you know, the mushroom thing was interesting, actually. I did like that. Price gouging. I wanted to say your name so that you can hear it again.
I was just tempted to do the same thing.
I just saw that. So I had a hard time reading your name at first because on my screen your name is coming up purple on a navy blue background, so I couldn't really make it out. But I see it now. Anyway, there you are. Glad you're catching up. That's a lot of fun. Okay, so yeah. Okay, so the food thing. I think that there could be other ways to it does seem like a sensible kind of way to talk about really the to sort of crystallize the core issue of like, are you going to comply or are you still, to what extent are you still resisting? Now, let's step back from that a little bit. Tell me about Darial's frame of mind. Like, where is Darial at the beginning of this episode? Where exactly is she in her process? She's never had I remember she was the one on whom the spell of bottomless dread was not placed, right?
Correct.
She saw it happen. She knew there was no resistance. She was trying to lead the escape, and then it got undone by the whammy, and she gave up. But she was still helping Rogren to escape. So like she wasn't like a collaborator.
Exactly. So like we're kind of taking her story much lower now. So with the spell of bottomless dread, she sees what happens to Edelas and is like, oh no, we won't be having any of that. I'll do anything to avoid that.
Right.
And so she makes a compromise of I'll serve Angband if that doesn't happen.
Right.
And then so the next one we see her, it's with Rogren's escape, and she's playing this game of like, well, as long as I don't actively help you escape,
as long as I can maintain some kind of deniability, I'm still doing
so like there's a veneer of service to Angband, but in my heart of hearts I'm still with the elves and helping the elves. So she feels very good about what she's doing in that episode.
Right.
And she's playing a game with finding the balance. By now things have changed.
Right.
She's been there a long time, and it's not a game. She's being treated as a collaborator by the army of Angband. So she's making decisions and choices that result in elves being treated badly or killed. And she's losing sight of what the goal of all this is. Because if it's comply so that you retain your free will, well, you've now just spent your free will to never have a free choice to make, but at least I have free will. It's like, but you can't use it.
Right.
So it's like, how does that make you any different from a willing participant in everything that Angband is doing?
Right.
Are you one of them? Is what she's struggling with here. Not personally, she doesn't see herself that way, but she knows that's how Gulin sees her, and she knows there's some truth to the accusation. So she's feeling very bad about where she is.
Right. Yeah, so price gouging, just for context there. The Gulin is an Argathron captive, but he's the one who is used to lure the army out. So Gwyndor, who is going to be the one who is in the Turin story, the escapee who helps Turin and brings him back to Nargothrond, is the brother of this guy. And Gwyndor's going to get captured.
We've renamed Gelmir to Gulin because there's 2 Gelmirs, and we saved the name Gelmir for the Turin story with Arminus.
Yeah, the other one.
Yeah. So Gulin in Tolkien's text is the father of Gwyndor and Gelmir. So we've just swapped the name out.
Exactly. But yeah,
to confuse everyone apparently.
Right. It's in that direction. So price gouging is saying that she hears this joke about how slow we goes, but apparently she never actually believed us that we go this slowly. But we really do. We really do. 3 years later, we're only in the Baron Leithian season.
By no fault of anybody around here has that taken longer than it was originally planned.
Please.
Please. We've been working on season 6 for a little over a year now.
Yes.
And we're now to the point of presenting a script for episode 10. So we're doing quite well.
We're making progress here. Absolutely cruising. Okay. So with Darial, so the challenging thing, right? One of the issues that I had when Gulin comes in and starts railing against Darial, I wasn't sure where my sympathies were supposed to lie. Now, to some extent, I'm sure that's deliberate, right? But when Gulin was calling her a collaborator, I guess I didn't see at first that Darial had changed, because when last we saw Darial, she was helping Rogran to escape, right? Mm-hmm. And so when my impression for the first 20% of this episode, at least, was that the drama here is that Gulin is the one who is being naive, right? That he was at fault. So when he was arguing with Darial, I thought that he was the one who was at fault for being unsympathetic to her position, especially since there was the whole Feanorian thing, right? So, I mean, he recognized her as a Feanorian, and so that would seem to also then add another layer of prejudice against her in his mind. So I thought at first that Gulin was being unfair, basically, in saying that she had she had given in and was just being a collaborator, and my emotional impulse as I was reading the beginning of the episode was to be like, no, Gulin, you don't understand, she's doing everything that she can, but there's you don't understand the power of Morgoth, and you don't understand, it's easy for you who's just arrived to be like, why aren't you resisting? Why haven't you tried to escape? And dude, she has, she's been here since season 4, and so that was my first, I didn't have from the start a clear picture of Darial's continued kind of degradation to have gotten to that point. I mean, I could see in the crisis point at the middle when she seems to be contemplating suicide, perhaps at the edge of the gulf. I wasn't sure if she was actually considering suicide or not, but in any case, she was having a low moment there privately when she then sees the light of the Silmarils, right, and has her little turning point there. But still, up until that point, it wasn't. I don't know. Even when we had the scene where she was being forced by the orc captain to pick out people to be punished, even then I was like, that was when so at first I thought I was on it, right? I'm like, okay, Darial, like my sympathies are with Darial. Gulin like just doesn't understand, right, and is not being fair to her. And then as it continued in that scene, I was less confident. I'm like, well, that's not a good look, right? But at the same time, like I still found it very moving, right? Again, because I was picturing her as still like basically being compelled but anyway, I was like, man, it's horrible to be put into that position, right? Which it is. I mean, it's a really cruel thing to be, like we're gonna whatever. But anyway, but in retrospect, I feel like my sympathies in the first like third of the episode were probably misplaced or like not quite aligned properly, and that might be my fault. But
No, no, I think we wanted it to be not obvious which one of them was going to win this argument or how it was going to get resolved. Because this is not a situation where someone's being an idiot and there's a clear right answer of what to do. There's
yeah,
not really a good way to survive Angband. There just is no great
right,
choice
right,
available.
yeah,
So no matter what you do, there's going to be some regrets and some second thoughts and some, what did I just do there? No matter what. And
which is why her death at the end felt like the happy ending. Like that
exactly.
was, and brings us back to the slavery, freedom, death triad that I was talking
Right.
about before.
Exactly. And so this is some, terribly depressing stuff to think about.
Yes.
And all the
Yes.
real life examples that relate to this, I don't want to talk about right now, but the general idea of finding a way through the story, you have to have moments of having sympathy for one or the other and thinking, oh no, you've got it all wrong. And so when she's being a collaborator, you're like, oh no, Darial, don't do it. But
Right.
what was she supposed to do? And then, Gulin, oh, you just don't know yet. And that's the point, is he's never seen the spell of bottomless dread. And it's not until they start talking like, oh, well, you heard what happened to Adalos, right? Like it's like, oh, right. There's a whole other thing that could happen here. And so Darial's like, well, at least I have my own mind. I might not have anything else, but at least I have my own mind.
For now.
And that's the thing, is how long is that going to last? So
right.
It's the whole thing. It's terrible. So I don't think you're mistaken to have chosen a side at the beginning, be like, oh, I think I see this working, and then it like was, oh well, I don't know.
Right.
Because we know Darial better than we know Gulin.
Right. Exactly. Here was another thing that I think was directing my sympathies. The loyalty of the others in her group, right? The fact that they all seem to care for her and view her as their leader still is what I think in some way almost concealed from me that she had ceased significantly to resist, like that she had changed from being the like when she helped Rogren escape,
Well,
I don't know how I
felt
would
like
do that differently, but
but I felt like there should be a cost to living like this. And like, she made a choice and she's been living with that choice and she was content with it to an extent. But like, this is an ordeal they're all going through. There's some trauma involved, that doesn't not leave its mark. And so even when they first meet her, it's like, oh wait, you're that elf that we haven't seen since whenever. And she's like, yeah, that was a long time ago.
Right.
She's changed and her appearance has changed. She doesn't look the same as she did.
Right. Yes.
500 years ago.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I think it does need to be unclear what
Yeah.
you're supposed to be thinking. And Gulin does have it wrong.
Yes.
Because like they have accomplished some really shockingly good things even in their servitude. But as you say, there's a cost, and eventually it starts to wear on everybody there.
Yeah, yeah. Was Gulin's eyes put out at the end?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, that's what I thought I remembered. Um, um, okay, so one of the things I wonder if she doesn't necessarily have to say it straight out, right? But that, Marie, the thing that you articulated, it doesn't get articulated in words, right? But that, like, she saved herself from the spell of bottomless dread. She has preserved her free will. And yet in doing so, she's completely given up her free will, right? Something like a more explicit realization of that. Even some kind of a realization that, like, she has, like, she has had the spell of bottomless dread put on her after all, like, it's in a sense to show what she's turning for, like what her turn at the end, because in the end what happens, she uses her free will to rebel, to do something. And my fear is that, because there was that reference to Ethelos, but it was pretty indirect. I mean, it was very gentle. Like it required a lot of independent remembering on my part to put it together there.
Right. Well, that was part of why you were a great test reader for this, because obviously in the script discussion, we're putting all this together and be like, okay, so this is where the prisoners were and this is what they did.
Right.
But
Right.
as you said, you weren't expecting this storyline because
No.
this is the part of the episode that we made up and it's not
Right.
actually in Tolkien's story at all.
Right.
So yeah, I was wondering how it would be perceived if you didn't know where things were going and everything. So there's probably a few things that could be made more explicit and connect the dots.
I feel
there's
it,
always
but
that balance of you don't want to bash the
you don't
audience
wanna
over the
just,
head,
spell it out. Right.
but you don't want them to get lost. And as you say, it's been 2 seasons since we've seen the spell of bottomless dread. Maybe we need a more stark reminder of what it entails.
Yeah.
Even
Some people who are working, but they've been placed under the spell of bottomless dread. Just like that, the camera passes over them, right?
But we see them. Yeah.
Right. We don't have to, like, it can come after the scene where Darial is saying, like, dude, you don't know, it could get way worse than this. Trust me.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
What if it's Gulin and his folks who come across this other elf, right? Like, so that basically they have a, like, we thought, they were, compliant slaves of Morgoth. Look at this poor person who seems to have lost his mind completely.
Or it can be part of Bran and Luthion's journey that they encounter zombies essentially on their way down. Like, so yeah, we can work it in multiple places and do different things with it. But yeah, I think that Gulin is much more willing to work with Darial and accept Darial once he understands better what the context is.
Mm-hmm.
Even if he doesn't agree with her, he at least sees where she's coming from.
Right. Right. Yeah, we would definitely need reminding about the spell of bottomless dread if we're going to see zombies, because that will be, if we're going to see bottomless dread if we're going to see dread zombies, we're going to need to be reminded more explicitly of that.
The dread pirate zombie.
I mean, yes, but yeah, I do think that a few more references to it sprinkled throughout would help with the with the themes there.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, in a similar vein, then, I'm feeling clear. Well, no, hang on a second. I'm not done with Darial. So, tell me that moment when I wasn't sure whether she was thinking of committing suicide or not. The turning point, of course, comes when she sees the Silmaril. And she, of course, she's a Feanorian. She recognizes the Silmaril, obviously, right? And that has an impact on her. But I wasn't 100% sure of exactly what that effect was, right? Like I was having a hard time piecing it out. Like, that she would revive in some way, like that her spirit would revive on seeing the white of Silmaril. But like, what exactly was it that she was deciding? Exactly what? I wasn't sure that I had a clear sense of like what exactly was the choice she was making.
Right. So if the whole idea of her resistance has been comply, comply, comply,
Right.
so that when the time comes, I can make the free will choice and do something that I choose.
Right.
What is she waiting for?
Right.
Like, the part where she was helping Ragnar escape, it was very obvious what she was doing. She was making choices that fit there. But now she has very few opportunities to do much of anything. So what choice is she waiting for? When she sees the Silmarils, she's like, that's it. It's literally the one thing that this whole journey to Middle Earth was all about.
Right.
That's what I'm supposed to do, is feel that from Morgoth. I'm 100% behind whatever plot gets the Silmaril out the door and Morgoth robbed of a Silmaril. So when she sees it, it's that aha moment of this is what I was waiting for, and nothing else matters now. Nothing else is important. As long as I do that one thing, it doesn't matter what the consequences are, because I will have made my choice and accomplished the thing I chose to accomplish.
Right. So
but it's like she has one chance to do the free will thing. She knows that she's not going to survive.
Right.
Being rebellious and angry.
Right. That's the important thing, right? Because essentially what she's been doing is choosing to save her life. Over, like, like, I mean, like the thing with being forced to pick out the prisoners by the orc captain, right? It's like, if you don't do this, they'll kill you, right? So you're choosing to prioritize your own life over the reminds me of a conversation I had with somebody a long time ago. I was talking about like shotgun marriages, and somebody said, like, being in a, like being in a shotgun marriage is not getting married of your own free will. And I was like, yes, it is. You totally are exercising your free will. You could choose to die. Like, well, that's a choice.
It's
a choice, but it's maybe not a free choice.
Well, that's why when the Declaration says that governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed, you could go a step further, and governments derive their powers from the consent of the governed. It's just that sometimes that consent is at the point of a bayonet.
Right. Exactly. That. But anyway, the point is, again, like, Darial has been exerting her free will, but essentially the only thing she's been exerting her free will to do is to survive, to spare her own life.
To keep going, or to keep her group going. I mean, it's not necessarily been completely self-centered, but it has been. But it has been survival oriented. Of stay alive today, so that tomorrow you can still make a choice and do a thing.
Exactly. And so, what that moment then felt like, the Silmaril moment, is that this is the thing she is going to choose. This is the thing that matters more than her, right? I will happily die in order to accomplish this other thing. And at no point had that. It was like, since the moment of her failed breakout back in season 4, there had never come the point where Darial was faced with something that was worth dying for, worth giving up that chance of what might happen tomorrow, right? It was just always getting through to that. Even with, of course, Rogren's escape didn't require her death in order for it to come across, so that didn't really come up there exactly. But even like risking her going with Rogren, right, which would have been one way of risking, her life potentially for something there.
Right. She was outside of Rogren's escape attempt. She was obviously an accomplice to him, but she wasn't part of it. So she had plausible deniability afterwards. She wasn't going to be the one who got punished for whatever happened.
Right.
So she could do that with minimal cost to herself and minimal loss and harm to other people.
Yeah.
This is something that she knows that's not true. She knows that there's going to be a consequence to stealing a Silmaril from Morgoth.
Right.
But she's okay with that.
But she's okay with that, right? So she's found this, and I'm trying to fit not only the fact that she's choosing something to die for outside of herself. But again, she has found what she wants to spend her free will on, right? The thing, and it's, I'm not articulating well in my own head what I'm trying to tease out here exactly. Stealing that she could contribute to a Silmaril being stolen from Morgoth, being liberating a Silmaril, right? Mm-hmm. Setting a Silmaril free from bondage, right? Is ultimately, that's the thing Darial chooses she's going to die for, is to set free a Silmaril. And so I guess and I know this got touched on in the episode, I'm just trying to sort of untangle the Oath of Fëanor. I know she hasn't personally taken the Oath of Fëanor, right? She's like an in-law of the Oath of Fëanor, so it's not exactly as binding on her. But I'm trying to make sure that I can really understand what, like, symbolically a Silmaril means to Darial, right? Like how it is fitting, how it works sort of thematically for the liberation of the Silmaril to be the thing that she's going to die, and that's going to be the culmination of her story.
Yeah, I know that Katrin was thinking of the Fëanorians as a whole of being supporters of the Oath. Like, obviously the only people who swore were Fëanor and his sons, but everyone who went with them in the ships, who was part of all of that, definitely
and who join in Kinslayings 2 and 3. Yeah,
like this group of people, they're behind this and they support it and they're in favor of it and they're gonna fight for it because they do in the story. And Darial is Curfin's wife, so she didn't agree with her husband on everything. They have some disagreements in the few scenes she had with him in our show, but she was on the ship with him and he was on Fëanor's ship.
Yes.
So the entire passage across the ocean, she was with Fëanor.
Right.
And presumably not standing around saying things like, I think we're making a mistake here.
Right.
That was not the conversation on that ship. So even if she hasn't been a character that we focused on for that part of the story, she's part of all that.
Right. But that, I think, is why that's the issue that I'm having, right? Mm-hmm. Is that the pure Oath of Fëanor perspective, when you see Beren like running out of the hall of Morgoth with the Silmaril in his hand, the pure Oath of Fëanor response is not like, yeah, go, we're getting a Silmaril away from Morgoth. It's, hey, buddy, hand it over. That's not yours. Hand that over. Right?
There is a line in there where
I remember
she's
the
trying
line.
to rally everyone. She says, let's get this out the door, and then it'll be up to my husband to fulfill his oath if he still lives and all that. Like whatever Fëanorians are alive outside the gate.
Right. Right.
they'll find that Silmaril. She's not worried about that.
Right.
But she wants to do what she can to get it to that step, because if this crazy person who just tried to steal a Silmaril gets killed and captured in Angband, that Silmaril goes back to Morgoth.
Yeah,
And
I guess.
so at
I
least if she
yeah.
gets it out the gate, then it's step one of fulfilling the oath of getting it back where it belongs.
Right.
But it's not her oath. So it's not like she
Yeah.
needs to personally claim it.
No, no, I know it wouldn't compel her in the same way that it would compel Curufin, for instance, but still, I guess what I was wrestling with was, on the one hand, this seemed like the Oath of Fëanor, or the Oath of Fëanor / the link between the Fëanorians and the Silmarils has pretty much been always a bad thing. Like, no good has come from that, essentially, since, I mean, the early days, like the making of the Silmarils. You can argue that was a good thing before it went wrong, but
it went wrong pretty fast.
It did go wrong pretty fast. Yeah. Anyway, point is, it's been like Fëanorians and Silmarils in the same has been bad news, like constantly bad news. In this moment, Darial the Fëanorian, seeing the light of a Silmaril, has this redemptive transformation for her character. It's the first and perhaps the only time we're being asked to see that Fëanorian connection with the Silmarils as actually having a positive impact on somebody's character. And that feels like a big deal. I don't know if it's a big deal in the sense of like it doesn't fit, like it goes too far, too deeply against the grain, or if we're not making a big enough deal about it, or what. Because see, I could imagine, for instance, that what we see here is almost something like, because again, the Silmarils are not evil, right? They're not evil. They're wonderful. They're excellent. They're great. They're beautiful, and even the love of Fëanor for his work is not intrinsically evil. Witness Aule's compassion with his point of view, right, about the breaking of the Silmarils with the trees. Again, not defending Fëanor or his, but it was not evil from the beginning, right?
No, but it's pretty clear what is evil about all of this. And
Right.
that is the possessiveness. That's the
Right.
problem. The
Right.
willingness to go kill people over it. That's the problem.
Right.
So Fëanor's hoarding instincts was the
Yes.
issue. And Darial, while making a choice that is not in any way repudiating the oath, is still go be free, Silmaril.
Yes.
So she's not being possessive of it.
And that the glimpse of it, like, okay, this parallel might not work at all, but it's like when she sees the light of the Silmaril in the darkness, she is surrounded by the deepest of darkness, right? She is in the pits of Angband, has been there for decades. How long has it been? It's been a long time. She's been there for a long time, right?
Yeah, she was captured
I don't remember
probably
the date
around before the year 100, and this is the year
centuries, right?
460.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know exactly what year, but
she's been in the pits of Angband for centuries, and in that moment before the Silmaril comes, she is wrapped in her deepest personal darkness, right? In her own reflections on how she has bottomless dreaded herself, even through preserving herself from bottomless dread, right? And in the midst of that, deepest and darkest of darknesses that has surrounded any character in this whole show. I mean, you could argue, right, that Darial is in the darkest place of anybody ever in this show so far. Anyway, whatever. But point is, she's in this huge, and then the light of the Silmaril breaks out, right? And when she sees the light of the Silmaril, she doesn't have ye old Fëanorian response to that, right? She does not feel the basically her own recognition of the Silmaril, her own love and admiration of the Silmaril, is like purified in that moment of the pure light shining through in the darkness. And it's like, here's the analogy, which is silly, but that she has a moment where the true spirit of Christmas comes through to her heart, right? And she and her heart changes and expands, and she is in that moment transformed now to make the decision and to go out and act completely differently than she had acted before. In which case, what we would be seeing here is essentially not just this moment of shift in Darial's own character. It's almost like the redemption of the Oath of Feanor itself, right? Like this is what, like a return to, like a cleansing of that Feanorian love and desire for the Silmaril, cleansed from all of the possessiveness that has tainted it since Feanor started tainting it, right? Anyway, I maybe I'm belaboring it too much, but that feels important to me. Like even as a separate glimpse, as a separate moment, that I wonder we might be able to use that again, like that this concept or this moment, this recollection later on.
I hope so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we have a couple of characters who are gonna have second thoughts about the Oath of Feanor
Yeah.
in the future.
Yeah.
So we can maybe play with this with some of them. Obviously, the people who actually swore it aren't gonna do anything useful, but
Yeah.
we can recall this again. But this happening in Luthien's presence, I think, works much better than if, like, there's nobody who swore the oath there, and who is there as Luthian. So that allows for the opportunity for that redemptive reaction. Because with Luthien, everybody who meets her loves her, but some people are selfless, love, I'll do anything for you, Luthien, aka Huan. And then some people are, I must make you mine and stick you in a dungeon, the Morgoth side of things, in fact. So
Right.
the I will destroy you because you are here and I want you to be mine forever and no one else can have you. A little bit of Celegorm's reaction as well.
I
So
just
that
had an idea. What if this connection between Darial and Luthien and the Silmaril is what explains why the Feanorians won't go after the Silmaril while Luthien lives?
There's an opportunity to do something in Mandos with our recently dead characters, which includes Darial. But the Feanorians aren't going to know about this.
Well, I was thinking about that. Like, how would they know?
It would have, yeah. So Dairon would have to get the story from Luthien, and then make this awesome lay about it, and then share it around all of Beleriand. And that's what he's going to do in his epic journey, is tell everybody what Luthien did. And the Feanorians like, oh, can't touch her then. And Darial gave her stamp of approval.
Yeah, I was thinking about the dissemination of the story, but Luthien telling the story, like, and I know, like, we're not going to have Luthien and Curufin meet and have tea to talk this over afterwards, but
the news can get back and they can make that decision to hold off on account of
and it literally didn't even occur to me until this exact moment that we just had Curufin trying to kill Luthien and Darial sacrificing her life to save Luthien within 2 episodes of each other. Like,
it
that literally didn't even occur to me. So, yes. Like, this is just another reason that I'm thinking, like, this, we can't, however we do it, we can't keep this connection a secret,
right? Once you invent something like this,
and the viewers,
we have to have this carry forward in the story.
And I don't think, because it's not like she would hide this. I mean,
no. And the way it could come up is I mean, we're gonna have a whole season next season of the Union of Mithros and the decision to do the Near Ninth.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's oh hey, let's go attack Morgoth now. The oath is a good part of that,
Right.
and directing the oath at Angband rather than at Luthien is a choice that needs to be made. Because
Yes.
there's one real easy Silmaril to go get, the one that's
Yeah.
down in Assyrian, and then there's the
Exactly.
two really hard ones to get that are in Angband, and they choose
Right.
Angband.
Right.
So they do
Right.
make that choice. And I'm not saying that it was a hard choice to decide to fight the bad guy instead of Luthien, but
It's not like
they
it's a no-brainer either, given the Feanorian track record. So yeah.
eventually they are going to go after the
Exactly.
Silmaril they think they can get. So eventually that's going to happen, but not at first. So yeah, I think that some respect for Darial's sacrifice might play into that discussion.
Yeah.
No, I think it's, we can figure out the mechanics of it later, but I wouldn't.
But let's not forget this. Yes.
But yeah, this is this is why I wanted to tease out the whole Light of the Silmaril thing and where it fits into Darial's choice and everything, because this feels to me like a scene which is going to be crucially important later on. We're getting something. We're seeing something with a Feanorian and the Silmaril here that has never been, and is going to be very relevant later on.
I mean, even Maglor deciding to throw his away.
Yes.
That
exactly.
choice.
Yeah.
Can
no, I was just thinking
this.
I was just imagining Maglor and Mithros bringing up this moment when, they're having their debate prior to, after the War of Wrath. Okay. So I'm glad but now let me come back and ask the question I was going to ask about Gulin. Okay. So what is Gulin's trajectory? That was also a little bit less clear to me. So he like, on the one hand, he gains respect for Darial, but I was not really sure that, he gains respect from her because, like, from his point of view, she like comes over to his side, right? Like, so she was wrong all along, and I was right the whole time that, like, active resistance is the way to go, right? And then, like, as soon as I start doing it, because it could even seem to him like she was following in his footsteps, because he doesn't even know, right? He's out there fighting, and then she piles in and helps rescue him, and he's grateful and stuff, right? But he doesn't have any clue of the context of what just happened there, so I felt like Gulin, it seemed to me, was ending this episode almost as ignorant as he started it.
Well,
but I wasn't sure of that.
Well, in that case, I think we need to clarify a few things, because it's intended to be a little bit more complicated than that, because it's not necessarily just that she was wrong and he was right.
Right.
He realizes that the good that just happened would not have happened had she had her mind overthrown or been killed, right? Like, the evil was good to have been, right? And so we have to illustrate that sense of, you always kind of have a purpose, and when you take yourself off the board, all of the opportunities for any purpose are gone. Your choices have ended.
Yeah, and we do see him figuring out that, just resisting all the time is just going to get people killed. So you got to choose your battles, and, like, choose fewer, choose one.
Right. And I
so
thought
that's his growth for the episode, is you can only choose one, and he chooses to save his companions at his own cost. He knows there's going to be a cost. Right. And when she's dying, he lies to her. And we don't see a lot of good guy characters in Tolkien be dishonest or untruthful.
Yeah.
So he basically is telling her, oh, everything's fine, like, it's all great, despite, like, pay no attention to the Balrog behind the curtain. Right. And he does it as a kindness to her, but it's a lie. And his, you can't compromise, you have to fight, you have to resist. He chooses the lie there. And I think that shows his um, softening to the idea of, hey, you're going to have to make a lot of compromises here, at least choose kindness.
Yeah. By the way, I loved how we maintained the Balrog rule there, right? A Balrog came on the scene or threatened to come on the scene, and Darial snuffs it immediately. Doesn't even make it all the way on screen, right? Like it. Yeah. Yeah. And for those who are new, it's been a long time since we talked about that. The Balrog rule is that when a Balrog comes on the screen in combat, a prominent named character has to die.
Yes.
So yeah, that was so we maintained the Balrog rule. I like that.
Yes, despite him not being
Not being actually the one to kill her. Yeah, exactly.
But so we technicality there, but it worked.
Yeah, no, it was good.
But the outcome of all this is that there had been tension between the two groups of elves, and one of the things Darial said to Gulin as soon as he started all this was, "What, you're going to fight the other prisoners? What good is that going to do? Like, we're all in the same terrible boat together. Like, figure it out." So at the very end, you see the groups united, and they're like, "Okay, we're all together. We'll figure this out together." Yep. And so that's Gulin's arc to this point. It's not the end of his story yet. So he might still be a little naive. He might still be a little whatever, but he's obviously had some hard lessons. And we are going to be killing him at the end of next season.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know what the intentions are for stories in Angband in season 7, but he's now available. If we want to tell a story with him to bring him to a point that leads up to that moment, we can.
Though we don't have so many interlocutors for him left.
Oh, did you notice how many named characters there were in this episode?
I did. There were a lot.
Katrin was very good about naming everyone. So what that means is plenty of interlocutors.
Well, I wasn't 100% sure how many of them had survived. I thought a bunch.
Well, yeah, we killed a few of them off. Yeah. But we
including
should still
Limping
have...
Elf, who was who got a name again. Yeah.
I'm trying to remember which one Limping Elf was,
but
yeah.
T.
Okay, because but I believe Damrod is still alive.
Damrod, yeah.
So, and he was Darial's like secondhand guy, so
right.
Presumably
we still have a representative from that camp. Yeah.
Right. So Damrod would be the voice of that group moving forward.
Yes. Catherine definitely took a page out of George Lucas's, building a universe handbook, name everything and everybody.
Right.
But I'll tell you, like, doing that sort of thing is gonna pay off. Like, naming characters so that we can use them in meaningful ways later is important.
Yeah. Agreed. Who knows? Maybe we'll be casting them in future seasons. But anyway, one last thought about Gulin, and that is one thing I thought might be a helpful kind of clarification, and that is clarifying exactly what it was that he thought he was seeing. So his view of Darial at the beginning, right? There are sort of three options, like three bad options, like for somebody who has gone bad and is being a reprehensible prisoner, right, from his perspective, right? One would be to have completely given up and have lost all will to resist. That would be merely pitiable, right? But to be essentially like you have the spell Bottomless Dread put on you. The second would be to be an active collaborator that is, and the hallmark of that would just be selfishness. Like, you have chosen to profit yourself off of the suffering of your fellow elves, right? And the third would be you have yourself actively become evil and you are now actively on Morgoth's side, right? And so it wasn't clear to me at the beginning which of those three camps he thought Darial was in, and how from that initial conception his idea changed. So that might be one way to kind of clarify a little bit more exactly, because it seemed to be kind of negative in the sense of we're resisting, you should resist too, That, in other words, that what he was noticing was that she wasn't resisting. And again, there were like different ways not to resist, right?
Right. Yeah. So the accusations can be a little more pointed.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. And I think my theory would be that he would think she was in camp number 2, that she was an active, that basically she was just interested in nothing other than saving her own skin. And I mean, she wasn't a collaborator in the sense of like being a profiteer. Like she wasn't thriving, on the suffering of others.
No one's thriving in this environment.
No. But like it's possible, like in an occupied situation, to be a collaborator who
Oh,
does,
for sure.
to be
Like I said,
like a
all
New
the real
Testament
life
Jewish tax
situation,
collector or something like that, collaborating with the Romans. Like
all the
that's
real life examples are awful.
yeah,
Really,
awful.
really awful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Or to
But
be like a
like,
Nazi collaborator. Yeah. There's all kinds of yeah. Yep. No, exactly. So I would think that like that would be probably because he probably doesn't think that. I mean, maybe he has a notion like, are you actually like evil? Are you Are you a willing servant of Morgoth now? But he probably would see that that's not the case. But he would. So I think he'd probably end up putting her in that middle camp, right?
yeah, and he's not entirely wrong. I mean,
Yeah.
to avoid the spell of bottomless dread, she's been willing to do a lot.
Yes.
And
Yes.
the reason and she didn't get followed up with that the same way Ethelos did is because she basically swore obedience to Angband.
Yeah.
So that's not something an elf would typically do.
Right.
So
Right.
that's she took this a step way too far at the beginning.
Yeah.
And thought it was worth it.
Yeah.
He's allowed to call her on that and be like, why are you doing what Angband's telling you to do? How is that helpful? And if we want to make more blatant accusations, we can have him say something like, you're helping him fight his war. How do you think we got captured?
Right.
It's your fault that we're here.
Right. It's your fault that you're yes, if you yes, you're helping Angband in order to save your own skin.
Right. Which would mirror her comment that like, keep doing what you're doing, you're gonna end up dead in a ditch. Like, she doesn't see his way as viable for survival reasons.
Right.
He doesn't see her method as viable for
like moral
being able to
reasons.
live with yourself reasons.
Exactly.
And but she does think that she does genuinely think he's being naive. Like and understandably so. Like she's pretty understanding of his perspective throughout. Like she's pretty willing to be like, look, I get it.
Right.
Like I know exactly how you feel. I have felt that way.
Yeah.
Many times.
But it's been long enough, she doesn't necessarily have a lot of respect for that viewpoint anymore. And some of the way she speaks about Fingolfin early on is pretty dismissive. Like, he threw his life away, what was that worth, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Again, with the, if you don't have survival, then you can't do anything more. Like, you're done accomplishing things.
If you haven't got your health, you haven't got anything.
I was just about to say that. Yes, exactly. No, I agree. Okay, now that's all much clearer. I'm feeling much more comfortable with the captive situation. And like I said at the beginning, this was a really complex interrelation of things to try to depict.
Yes.
And
Yeah. I mean, anytime you have a significantly philosophical storyline, it's going to get complicated.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, this wasn't like an Athrobeth storyline, but it was what's
absolutely.
the best thing to do in a really, really bad spot? And there's
I mean,
and like you said, it's the have you forgotten the death option? And she has, because she thought that meant it's over, and she doesn't want it to be over. She still wants to be able to do a thing.
Yeah.
Viewing death not as the final surrender, but as the actual escape is, I think, a really important thing there.
Yeah, the whole release from bondage resulting in Luthien becoming mortal is like, it's hard to avoid that interpretation here.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
And one thing that I really kind of like, because she has become a legitimate tool of Morgoth, and in allowing her life to end, she has robbed him of that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah. And I also knew that we have been maintaining this thing where if you swear an oath, if you break the oath, you die. And that's why we killed off one of the twins in the ship burning, because he was going to turn back, and then,
Right.
oh, look, he's dead.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
So she swore loyalty to Angband, and now she helped a Silmaril escape. And wouldn't you know it, she's dead in the next scene. Like, we're maintaining that. I don't think she died because of her oath. I think she died because she was fighting for something where she didn't care if she died. So she kept fighting until she died.
Can we arrange the setting so that she winds up dying in a ditch of some kind?
No, because Guilin's holding her. So
Right.
So what? You can't
They could
hold
both be in
somebody
a
in a ditch?
They could both
No,
be
I
in
mean,
a
you
ditch.
dead in a ditch usually means
Yeah.
off to the side of the road,
Yeah.
abandoned, like
Lying where
roadkill.
no one cares about you. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's there. The implication there.
If
But
someone's
one thing-
cradling you in their arms in the ditch, you've lost the dead in a ditch thing, basically.
Well,
yeah.
it actually, like, just having the visual be that, because it would take them also out of view from a greater distance, so that, like, it can kind of give them a certain amount of isolation for a second.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
While also giving us at least a little bit of irony, because she says that that will be Gwylin's fate, and in fact it isn't.
I thought we were just going to get that by having him.
Yeah.
Throw
Oh
him
yeah,
in the
yeah.
ditch.
Yeah. We'd have that too. Yeah.
Oh yeah, he's not going to survive this ordeal.
No, and at least the majority of his body parts could get thrown into a ditch. But anyway, let's talk about Baron and Luthien.
Yeah, this is the Baron and Luthien season, after all.
Absolutely. But
Not only that, a key episode in their story. They
key
fulfilled
episode
the
in their
quest.
story. And yet, like, the B plot you guys developed was so fascinating and compelling. It's what I wanted to spend most of my time talking about. And of course, actually, this all makes a good deal more sense than it might seem on the surface, because once again, this is an episode where there was comparatively little improvisation with the Baron and Luthien story. Like, most of the stuff, and I was certainly noticing, Marie, as you added on the top of the slide here, it was like super Lay of Leithian from beginning to end, right? Like, we do have the one version of this story which gives more detail about this segment, and that is the Lay of Leithian. And of course, for people who don't know or don't remember, the Lay of Leithian ends with Karkaroth chomping off Baron's hand. So, like, it gets right up to the end of this episode is where he wrote the Lay of Leithian and then stopped. So it is a really fun way to sort of acknowledge, like, the end of the Lay of Leithian by really giving it its final hurrah in episode 10 here. I loved I didn't look it up, but Luthien's song that she sings to Karkaroth is word for word from the Lay of Leithian, right?
I believe so.
Yeah.
I thought I recognized that.
There are several passages, and Katrin did a great job of adapting portions of the lay, because
Yes, there were several times that kept, especially in the throne room scene, like it kept welling up.
Yeah, because you can't really have people speak in verse to each other for like 3 pages, so
Right.
so you have to do a lot of. I mean, you could, but we didn't. So
Unless you're Tom Bombadil, but yeah, no, exactly, yeah. And I mean, and of course, I mean, from Karkaroth, because Luthien smells like elves, right? So it's seriously,
I know it's exactly what happens in that scene.
It's exactly what happens. So yeah, I mean, there's so many places. I mean, it was very Lay of Leithian, which I loved. But again, for that reason, because Katrin was following the Lay of Leithian so closely, again, a lot of the story here was sort of, there were fewer decisions in some ways to be made here.
Right. Tolkien wrote parts of this.
Yeah, Exactly.
In fact,
Exactly. Which is handy. It was thoughtful of him to have gone to
It
that
was.
effort on our behalf.
Really, really nice.
Yes. Yes. I one thing I thought was interesting. By the way, I loved the we spent a lot of time last episode talking about the the Haim and the fell, right, and the transformation and the untransformation, and Katrin managed to do that like 7 times, right? I mean, they're like coming in and out of disguise all the time, and she usually makes it happen like pretty subtly and like even off screen often. Anyway, I thought that was just because we had just spent so much time talking about that, I was very conscious of it every time it came up, and I thought it was handled really deftly every single time. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah. And that's part of the challenge with a visual medium, is that the audience is going to remember what you just did. You can't repeat things. You can reference them, but
Right.
if you literally did the same sequence 7 times in a row, this is only acceptable in like children's cartoons and such. You can't just
Right.
do that.
Right.
So yeah, I think Katrin took a lot of attention to the detail of, well, what do I show this time? What's the important part of this sequence, and how much can I show by someone else's reaction to it?
Yeah.
Right.
Instead of seeing it. Yeah. So she put a lot of attention to detail based on that conversation.
No, that was great. That was really really well done. I loved all of those elements, and just what it provided, with the opportunity to get more conversation between the two of them, more interaction between the two of them. The one part, as I said at the very beginning, the one part that is not even detailed in the Lay of Leithian is the descent, right?
Correct.
And I honestly couldn't tell, as I was reading it through, I couldn't tell whether I liked or disliked the fact that Beren and Luthien, as they were descending, were like struggling or almost struggling with navigation, basically, right? There was like the sheer intimidation of Angband is dark and vast, and it's hard enough to break into here, right? But once you're in here, like, what are you looking for, and where do you go? Like, there's a part of me that really liked that. There was a part of me that found it a little bit anticlimactic, right? To have Beren and Luthien, descending into Angband and basically coming to places where they're like, do we turn left or right? Right. Like there were moments where that felt almost anticlimactic. And yet, again, but I wasn't sure I disliked it either. Like because the whole idea of, and especially the way, the mere fact that they had to like wend their way through like where there were prisoners and corpses and everything else, so that it like cumulatively began to like overwhelm Luthien's spirits with her compassion for the suffering, her, the oppression of the evil and her compassion for the suffering of the elves that they were passing. I mean, I liked that sort of overall effect. So, but I wasn't, this is why I'm not even really sure exactly how I felt about this, but it definitely seemed to me one of the most noticeable choices in that way. Notice, for instance, notice how Tolkien avoids this in The Lord of the Rings, for instance, right? Like the highway to the Cracks of Doom, once once Sam gets up the mountain and they strike the highway, there's no like, and at the last second, are they going to turn down a blind passage accidentally and have to like it's just like,
on the other hand, Shelob's lair,
right,
they do turn down the wrong passage and hit the wall and have to turn around and go back, and then that becomes important later because that wall is how the orcs get in, and but there's a lot of wandering around lost in Shelob's lair.
There is, though the wandering around lost in Shelob's lair leads to that feeling of being like, where Tolkien accomplishes much more subtly what Peter Jackson accomplishes with enormous webs, right? And Frodo getting entangled in the webs, right? That sense of being trapped and ensnared, nets in a net, as Sam says, right? Like that. I don't know. I parallel it. My instant parallel was to the Cracks of Doom, because this is like the center,
The end.
right? This is
Yeah.
this is the end. This is the big boss, or what feels like it should be the big boss, right? It's not actually, in a sense, the big boss confrontation. That will be Mandos, really, right? Thematically and
Yeah,
everything.
she's not
but,
gonna put him to sleep.
right. Exactly.
Well, and that's like we've seen with Sauron take the tower down, and Morgoth throws that in her face, like, "Good luck taking this place down.
Right.
I don't have that weakness, and
Right.
can't." So she's like, "Oh, right, sleep time."
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah,
with
exactly.
Mandos, she has nothing left as far as power goes
Yeah.
to influence him. Just pity.
Yeah. So but I mean, and certainly, I pity, as you say, right? Like that's yet another reason why the accumulation of pity as they descend, right, through and see all these things, seems very apt, right? Because it is the suffering that was almost overwhelming her in Angband, which she's going to sing about in Mandos, right? So that, like I said, I'm not saying I dislike the more gradual descent of Beren and Luthien, but yeah. So as I say, I'm not sure what I'm saying, but there were moments when it felt like on the cusp of anticlimax.
Well, if the general idea is, if you want to get to Margot's throne room, you just keep going down.
Right.
There seems to be an inevitability to it. There's always a way down. It's a pit. You just keep going into the pit.
Like in Dante over here.
Exactly. We had planned out that Angband would be concentric circles getting smaller and smaller and smaller back in season 2.
Right.
So Katrin obviously kept that design
with or without ice
in
at
mind.
the bottom. Yes.
Well,
yes.
But yeah, so with that kind of design, there is an inevitability to the path.
Right.
It's not a maze like Moria.
Right.
But at the same time, it's claustrophobic, and you can't always see where you're going. So, and it's easy to get confused and disoriented. So I don't know. I agree that there's a balance to be had between we just go down there, and it should be an effort and a struggle to keep going.
I think I have an idea of a revision that might kind of clarify or streamline that a little bit. In retrospect, the moments where I felt most at risk of anticlimax is when they're interacting with like lesser minions of Morgoth on the way down, right? Not like when they're seen, right, or when they're actually like stopping to interact with them.
Well, there was a goal to have a little touch of the Luthien effect on the descent into Angband, and it's got to be subtle because she can't do anything.
Right.
But
if
we wanted to have at least
springing up in Angband, that would be suspicious. Yeah.
So, did you want fewer interactions in that part, or because we didn't want to cut that entirely? That's
by the Luthien effect, you mean the effect she has on others?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That I think is fine. It was like any kind of like dialogue between them and orcs or werewolves or anything else. Those are the parts that felt unnecessary. Like, yeah.
Like the part where the orcs are sitting there and they're talking about being late for the feast and going down, and like right before going into that scene.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
But what about when Beren rescues the guy who's going to get eaten by the werewolf? By claiming that that's his food.
I'm okay with that, with the rescue. I'm okay with the rescue, though. I think I was expecting more payoff at the end of the episode from the rescued elf. Like, do we see the rescued elf again? What
He's
comes of the
part
rescued
of.
elf?
He goes back to be part of Darial's group. So we do see him again at some point. I forget where he is and all of that, but yeah, it wasn't a big payoff in the sense of they didn't save anybody. Like they didn't actually save anyone in Angband.
Right.
And
Right.
I thought that was only fair because Angband is a terrible
Angband,
place.
yeah,
And
yeah,
even if
yeah.
Leithian goes there, it's still a terrible place.
Yeah.
So like there was a constraint on how much they could accomplish. But you know, that guy had a better day than he was gonna have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he can
Yeah.
then go back and do a kind thing for someone else. I think he is one of the people helping distribute things later or something. So
Yeah.
he's
I think I was looking for more of the Leithian effect from him, like for him to
okay.
be like altered in some way, even for him to, I don't know, be there to help Darial, to be instrumental in Darial's turn, and somehow at the end, I'm not sure. I don't have concrete ideas about exactly how I would have wanted that to pay off, but
Instead of having Damrod be there talking with Darial in that moment, have Werewolf Dude be the one who's standing there and
or have where Damrod be werewolf dude or whatever.
oh, okay, yeah, it's something
Yeah.
to make it more
Something to
significant.
make,
Okay.
yeah. So like basically, Darial, who has seen the light of the Silmarils and had her moment, right, is talking to the person who's encountered Leithian and who has, like, when they're, because like nothing good happens in Angband, right? And this person's just had something good happen to them. They don't understand it, right? But they've had something good happen to them, and so that seems, yeah, I don't know. Like I said, I didn't have a specific payoff in mind, but I felt
But
like
you wanted more payoff.
I wanted more payoff. Yeah.
Okay.
I wanted more.
We
payoff.
we can pass that along to Catherine. I'm sure she can
Yeah.
emphasize
Yeah.
that dude's role in the climax.
Yeah. Exactly. And he can die or he can not die. I mean, he can be one of the ones who, you know, he like if Damrod survives, then we can, you know, whatever, we could have it be him. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, again, the main bits, like I had, in some ways, I feel like Katrin, with the way that she has deployed the Lay of Leithian, has kind of disarmed. Oh, like I was all ready. I'm like, okay, Leithian dancing before Morgoth. Let's go. Let's talk about what are we doing here. And there are still questions I have, right? But I felt like a lot of it was kind of. I mean, I was getting the Lay of Leithian vibe so thoroughly through that scene that I had fewer questions. But let me go ahead and ask my awkward dancing question. Like, what moves do you pull out in front of Morgoth? Like, how does that dance go? I mean, she's dancing. It's a classic example, right? You can say in a book she danced and walk away. Right. With an actual actress on screen, we gotta choose the moves here.
So the one thing that is in the lay that we did not have in the script is
I noticed.
I thought you might have is the moment where Morgoth reaches for Leithian and she sidesteps him, right?
Yeah.
Because they have dialogue, but that particular moment doesn't happen.
Oh well, I was talking about like the lines which could be taken as actively flirtatious with Morgoth.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
That's gone too. But I figured you noticed that as well. But
I did.
But that moment of him reaching and her sidestepping, when you say what does the dance look like, there's some of that going on.
Right.
She's dancing in a hostile environment, so her main goal has to be to get away from
like
everybody
avoidance
in that room.
of yeah. It's a crowded
This
room, right? It was. I mean, as it was described. Yeah.
Right. So she's dancing around this room, not touching anyone, and yet her cloak is coming with her, and that's touching everybody. And so she's untouchable and yet in contact with everyone because it's close. So you know, that kind of choreography.
Okay. Okay. Do we have orcs and like are people making grabs at her that she's dodging as she's dancing?
I don't know how
Does it
long we would want to
become a
maintain that.
quasi like action sequence kind of thing there? Not exactly like a full blown martial arts fighting sequence or anything like that, but is there
Right.
is it I mean I could see things sort of happening like that in
I
some
mean,
way.
she's singing a lullaby while doing this, so
Right.
I mean,
Which is awesome. Like the idea of someone like, you know, doing, you know,
avoidance tactics.
right, like well, like dancing, which is like a first cousin to a martial arts, routine, while singing a lullaby. I mean, there's nothing that's not awesome about that in my head. So,
Yeah.
Well,
but yeah,
also you can avoid a lot of this stuff with how you shoot it. Like if
right,
when we're shooting her, we're not showing people around her, or if like we illustrate the magical quality of her dance by like completely washing out the background
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
when we're looking at her. Um, that that would make a huge difference in
Yeah,
Yeah, and Tolkien does imply that she uses the full space, not just the floor.
right,
So you could do some 3D stuff with the
yes,
choreography if you wanted to.
yes, yes. Luthien dancing in all the dimensions. Yes, yes. Yeah, yeah, um, yeah. Uh, okay. But yes, I did notice that we stayed miles away from the innuendo of the Lay of Leithian.
Yeah, well, apparently both Katrin, Alana, and I are all like, oh, you know, the best passage of that part of the lay is when Morgoth starts talking about crushing flowers. Like, that's the part you want.
Right.
So we were all agreed that that's what needed to be in there.
Agreed. Agreed. I like it. I like it.
And that's what's in there. Just no
yeah.
flirting.
No flirting. No flirting. Yeah.
And I know you'd mentioned the threat to Eowyn from the Witch King, right?
Yeah.
So the idea was that we don't know what Morgoth is intending to do to her, but something terrible.
Yes. 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 Yeah. Yeah. Question. Last question. The Silmarils. How Morgoth, Silmarils in his crown, facing Luthien, right? There's a certain amount of like, this is a big deal, right? I mean, like when Luthien and the Silmarils are in the same room for the first time ever, right? Like the most beautiful work of craftsmanship ever and the most beautiful of all the children of Iluvatar. Like this is a lot of beauty in one room, right?
The most beautiful work of a incarnate craftsman and the most beautiful work of the original craftsman.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, yes. Exactly. And there's like there's a certain reflectiveness there, emphasized by Morgoth's desire, right? Morgoth, whether he physically reaches out to her or whether his just, his desire to ensnare her and keep, and as you say, whatever it is, we don't know exactly what he was planning to do to her or with her. But the fact that he's wearing the Silmarils in his crown is itself kind of suggestive of the general trend of his thought towards, towards beautiful things like Luthien, right? I mean, we see what he's done with the one. We can kind of imagine what he's going to do with the other, right? And so I am thinking. So this is not like a correction or whatever, just a general sort of suggestion that I think whatever happens in the dancing scene, there needs to be a clear sort of mirroring between Luthien and the Silmarils in some sense. Like the parallelism there, I think needs to be clear, and that will help, I think, to inform the kind of vague, general, but ominous and creepy sense of what Morgoth intends to do.
I know that we had discussed earlier that the Silmarils could change their brightness and appearance based on their mood
Right.
to an extent. So they could flare brightly or dim down or have softer colors or more striking color. Just they look like whatever we want them to look like, essentially. And
stage spotlights on Luthien while she dances,
whatever.
Yeah.
But I do think that they've been imprisoned in the Iron Crown for a long time. They're probably kind of dull and dim most of the time for a Silmaril. I mean, I'm not saying they wouldn't stand out in the pits of Angband, but they're, medium bright. And then Luthien walks in, flares, like I think when you're saying in that interaction, when Morgoth and Luthien are talking to each other, the Silmarils can respond to her, and they would respond by changing in some way, whether it's flashing or getting bright. And I mean, not to the point of a spotlight, maybe, but there probably would be parts of that scene where the illumination would be from the Silmarils, not from the pit of fire that's in the room or whatever else, right?
Yeah.
So if the Silmarils are providing the light, then we see that reflected off of Luthien. It's gonna draw that parallel and connection.
Yeah. And then, by the way, when Beren has the Silmaril in his hand and is carrying it out, it glows brightest of all, right? Like the liberated Silmaril whose light frees Darial up above is going to be like all three Silmarils on the Iron Crown should look dull and dim compared to the one Silmaril released. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And I know that's a little challenging because you don't want like ugly Silmarils under any circumstances.
Right.
But they can get much brighter and happier.
Yeah. And I have to say, high on my list of serious artistic challenges is the Silmarils in Morgoth's Iron Crown. It's hard to do that well, I think. I mean, I've seen a bunch of images that I kind of like, but I've never seen one that I've totally loved, that I feel like really nails the essence of the mythic concept of the Silmarils in the Iron Crown of Morgoth.
Right. It's a contrast that is very weird. And you need an ugly Iron Crown with beautiful bright Silmarils trapped.
And light and darkness, like, him dark and the Silmarils bright light without it looking like headlights, without it look. And there's so many ways in which it can look bad if so it's
it is a challenge,
it's a major challenge. And so I think that's
but one for the art people.
Exactly.
Yep, we're giving them a few more months still to put some stuff together.
I would love to talk about this more when we talk about art stuff later on, but
not too much later on. Only a couple months.
Not too much later on. We're getting there.
Artists get to work.
That's right. I don't want to give the artists a false sense of security that they have an infinite amount of time here. Yeah, that's true. We're getting there. All right. Well, we've it is late. We just talked about the betrayal of Morgoth, Journey of the Eagles. Loved Hurin and Huor. That was great. Little cameo from Hurin and Huor, whom we won't have any idea who they are, but that's excellent, right? These two teenagers in Gondolin, very cool. The last glimpse of Dairon and the dog, I liked. That was good. So anyway, yeah, this stuff I think was all. I was a big fan of the Hurin and Huor cameo. I thought that was a brilliant seed planted for next season when we're gonna go back and do that.
Believe that was Alana's suggestion, but it has been a very long time since that suggestion was made.
Yes,
because not even from the script discussion, that was made early in the season, and we're like, yeah, let's do that. And I think it was Alana. But.
Yeah, no, that was cool. That was very cool. Okay. Last point, which I meant to bring up earlier. The moment when Baron and Luthien are holding each other and talking before, when she's having her hard time, right? And he sings. That moment, that is the Stairs of Cirith Ungol moment.
They're on some stairs when it happens.
I noticed they were on stairs, and like I wanted more fan service at that moment. I wanted just a little bit more, and I'm not sure exactly what. Right, a little bit more explicit, like that. I don't want anybody
a little
to
more
miss
schmaltz.
I did. I wanted more. I don't know what it was. I don't know if I wanted, Baron and Luthien to be saying like, "Do you think someday someone will sing a lay about our story?" I kind of like. I'm not saying I necessarily wanted to go that far.
Well,
what about Baron the Brave? Luthien wouldn't have gotten far without Baron.
Yeah, but no, it can tie into Darial's storyline. The whole idea of Darial is, if you're not there, you can't do things. So you have to keep being there so you can be the person to do the thing. If Luthien's like, this is a bit much, Baron could say something along the lines of, well, I don't want our story to end now. Let's keep going. And is this a way to help you? Like, we could put a line in there that is something about, yeah, this is tough, but we're going to keep going. And that would tie into the...
It would tie into the whole, like, is this a happy ending story or a sad end story?
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's a perfectly apt moment within the context of this narrative. It's a perfectly apt moment for them to be talking about it. Because on the one hand, like, they haven't won yet. Like, they haven't confronted Morgoth yet.
They don't know what kind of story they're in either.
They don't know what kind of story they're in. And what's more, like, no one thought anybody could get into Angband, right? And here they are. They've gotten into Angband. They've gotten down to the bottom, and then they're like, here we are again, just like Sam and Frodo in Mordor, on the borders of Mordor, and yet being like, on the one hand, it seems like we are caught up in a big story. I mean, Beren thought he was just getting sent off to his death, right, by her father. But it turns out, unbeknownst to her father, they are part of it. This, we were talking about doom, right? That he was, he was perceiving that this doom lies upon him and can't be escaped. Just in the last episode, right? And so, some kind of like contemplating on that, like, this is. There is a great doom at work in this, and but we don't know if this is a happy ending story or a sad ending story. Kind of.
We'll just have to keep going and see the end.
So Gothmog suddenly shows up and says, "You best start believing in demon stories, Missy. You're in one." In Hellfire stories.
In Hellfire stories, right. Anyway, I'm just saying, like, that moment, that parallel, that was a gorgeous parallel. I just want to make sure we don't lose any possible opportunity.
So what you're saying is that we need to give the screenwriter a little bit of a bigger hammer. There is what you're saying.
Yes, I thought that there was.
We were trying very hard to be to restrain the use of the hammer.
No, pull out the hammer in that moment. Pull out the hammer, because honestly, it's worse to have it. Far worse than having someone say, "Oh, well, that was a little bit obvious," and drawing the parallels to the Stairs of Cirith Ungol would be anybody missing that moment, that the way that Frodo and Sam are thinking back to the Beren and Luthien moment, to miss the opportunity to have Beren and Luthien in the parallel moment having the same we can't. That's top 5 in my list of callbacks that I would want to set up. I mean, we've already been working on the singing to Maedhros parallel for Frodo and Sam and everything, right? Like, I mean, there's that's another one of my top 5s, right? Is the singing to the person who is in prison up above.
By the way, did you know? Did you see what I posted about? I had a sudden realization that that's not the only time that singing summons eagles.
Right.
15 birds and 5 fir trees.
Right. Right. Exactly.
So for spontaneous eagle appearances,
Rescue. Yeah.
yes, there appear to be very often or almost always accompanied by a preceded by a song.
Right. Sometimes at some time delay, like Dairon's song.
Yes.
In the Chrysagram. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yep. But anyway, no. I almost forgot to mention the Stairs of Cirith episode, which I definitely.
Well,
yes.
we wouldn't want to forget to mention it.
No, bring out the hammer. Bring out the hammer is my advice on that one. For sure.
Yeah. But one thing that was nice throughout the whole episode is, I mean, obviously she called it descent, and there were stairs everywhere, and people were always going down the stairs, and including in the frame scenes, there was people going downstairs to meet with each other. Like it. Yeah. So it was subtle and just setting things up and not like bashing you over the head with it in most places. So if there's going to be one hammer, we can put it on the stairs.
That's where I want the hammer for sure.
Gotcha.
And one thing I would add, as another compliment to Katrin and the wonderful work she did in this script, never ever has the parallel between like the mythic shape of the Beren and Luthien story and its parallel to the Orpheus and Eurydice story been clearer to me than in this script. I don't know what it was exactly about it that helped to capture this, but the way in which the Beren and Luthien story plays off of that and evokes that same the mythic sense of the of Orpheus and Eurydice. It's on one level it's very clear, but on another level it never really strikes me. Like I'm never thinking about Orpheus and Eurydice when I read the story in the Silmarillion.
Because Tolkien never writes about the trip to hell. He skips that part.
He skips the actual descent, right? Yeah.
And that's kind of a big part of that story.
And I think I realize that's maybe why.
The ascent is the more important part of that story.
Right.
But even then he rushes through it and just like they got out of there.
And then they're at the gate. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
it's like Wolf to Morgoth, back to Wolf immediately.
Right. So he implies that all happens, but he doesn't write about it or spend any time there. And so if you don't spend time on the journey, it's not the same story.
Not the same story. Yeah, but no, it was like I said, I was feeling very like viscerally the spiritual connections between the story and the Orpheus and Eurydice story. I thought that was really powerful, and it was whether that's it, whether it's the elaboration of the descent, whether even it was the condition and situation of the prisoners making it feel more like hell that they were descending into, more like Dante, as Nick and I are both alluding to with our backgrounds here. It was whatever it was. That was the effect in the end that I found that it had, and I found that I found myself kind of contemplating the connections between the Beren and Luthien story and Orpheus and Eurydice more. Like I was considering that more and finding the beauty in those parallels more striking here than I ever had before. I'd more often thought about it, of course, with Mandos, which of course is more obvious in some sense.
Yeah.
But it's very powerfully active here in this sequence as well. And so like the where like the Silmaril is like Eurydice, basically, which is rescued and then lost right before they have finally escaped.
Yeah.
Anyway, so so Katrin, whatever it was that you did, it was awesome because that was I felt like this script really, like, in this way, I feel like it has really, like, enriched my reading of the Baron and Luthien story. So I'm very grateful for that.
That's very cool.
Well, that's high praise, and that's awesome.
It was phenomenal. This is the fun of doing adaptation like this, that you, and this is the thing that I always feel saddest when people are, like, afraid of adaptations, or, like, I'm afraid it's going to ruin the original. And I'm like, on the one hand, I can kind of understand what you mean. Though I always feel that anyone whose relationship with the original book is actually ruined by watching a bad movie that is adapting that book, I'm like, I have a hard time really understanding it. But in any case, but, like, what you're missing is, like, there are so many things, even in thinking about and discussing, where an adaptation didn't go well,
goes wrong,
still can serve to enrich your own reflections and understanding of a story. This has been my experience, and this is why I have become such a proponent of adaptation in general, because I think this has been to the very great enrichment of my own understanding, both the process of doing an adaptation together here and the process of, discussing and analyzing other adaptations and things. So
It's such a fun way to interact with a work that you enjoy. I mean,
it is. Yeah.
I stay with no bias whatsoever, but
Yes, exactly. All right. So our next session is in 2 weeks on Thursday, April 13th. And we'll be discussing, we're going straight through up to episode 11. No intermediate sessions here down in the home stretch. Well, it will be at the very home stretch, I think, right? But
there's more intermediate things left. We're just
and it's a good thing too, because somebody keeps holding up the works
on episode 13.
On episode 13.
Yes.
Well, I just wanted to let you know, Brian was very grateful that we haven't had the final script discussion yet. He said that he might be able to join us for that one.
I think that would be great, since he is also a father now.
Oh, hey, congratulations, Brian.
Yep.
That's great.
Yep.
That's great. Oh, it is wonderful to see, the families of longtime some film viewers growing over time. Will be before we get to the War of Wrath, we'll be celebrating Nessa's high school graduation.
No.
What we are doing is creating the next generation who's going to go on and do the Lord of the Rings portion of some film, because realistically, it's going to be like 20 more years before we get there.
Exactly.
So,
anyway, so the script discussion will be April 7th. So Friday, April 7th at 8 p.m. So you can join on the same channels that this is being broadcast on now, to join in the brainstorming session to figure out the details of episode 13. And then
trip to Mandos.
It's the big deal. Big finale of season 6. And then meantime, we will discuss episode 11, which is the recovery episode, right? Do we get married, or does the wedding happen in 12?
No.
The wedding is technically like a tag, and then the focus of the wedding will be the beginning of 12.
Yes.
Right. Okay. All right. So we're
get up to the wedding,
but not quite including the full wedding. Okay. All right. So that's that is episode 11 next time. Awesome. Thank you guys so much. This was great. Fun discussion. Really great work on this script. Thank you again, Katrin, for your work on that. And I will say it as always, thanks for listening, and Godspeed. Bye now.